So, Theara, hello and good morning here on a
Good
Saturday
morning.
morning. So wonderful for you to join us with this series that we've been doing, Learn to Listen. So thank you for your time and your years of expertise. I'll only share a tiny bit, but would love for you to do a bit more of a background. I believe we've known each other maybe about 15 years or so. And I think that actually happened through Cheryl Cutlip through Project Dance.
Yes.
And just when I learned of you and then actually had you come to be a guest artist for us at Belhaven University, it just was such an honor and such a joy. You as a professional dancer for many years and your influence as a voice, as a woman of God has been longstanding. And so again, thank you for your consistency and thank you for your faithfulness. And so just, again, so very honored for you to join us this morning. So if you'd share a bit about your background and your experience, then we can jump into some of the conversation that we have with our Learn to Listen.
Well, I started my professional career when I was 13 years old with Dance Theatre of Harlem. And Dance Theatre of Harlem was started by Arthur Mitchell, the first African-American principal dancer with New York City Ballet. And I was what they called a baby ballerina. This was back in the late 70s. And I did my first principal roles when I was about 15. And one of them was the Pas de Deux and Agon at the Royal Opera House at Covent Garden when I was 17. And traveled to, I think, 6 continents by the time I was 24. And then went off to do musical theater. And in the height of my musical theater and commercial career, I kept having this gnawing feeling to come away. And then eventually it was clear that I had to come away from the industry for a season and learn about who I was and what I was created for, and really understand my role as a worshiper, which was different from my role as a performer. And so then it was the season of being gutted out and cleaned up and broken and rebuilt. And now the Lord is putting me in strategic places, in different spaces, to represent the kingdom of the Lord. And it's not traditional by any means. But it's interesting because I'm really seeing God, like really, really seeing God in ways that I never dreamed were possible. Mm-hmm. And with that being said, hoping that my life and experiences can help someone else to see the Lord.
It's beautiful. That's so beautiful. Well, one thing that I've respected about you from the start is your adamant pursuit of Jesus and your desire to be found by him and to be pursued back by him, and just the spiritual depth in your life that has continued to be cultivated. And so I know that's because your desire to listen to the Lord. So I'd love to hear some ways you have cultivated that skill and discipline of learning to listen to the voice of God, or even learning to listen to your body, or in relationships, however it is that you really believe that God speaks to you and that you know he's in communication with you.
I think one of the most important things is reading the word. That's how you hear. How can you, well, it says, how can you come to faith without a preacher? And how can you, and you can't, and you have to hear the word. And so by reading the word, ingesting the word, makes it easier to understand God and God's ways. And then worship. Worship has been so critical and so key. There's going to church, and then there's worship. And once I entered the space of entering into worship, understanding it biblically, then like really saying yes to God and aligning myself with what it says as it relates to faith, then I really started seeing God. So that word, the study, the worship, and being still and quiet. Really, seriously. making a habit in the morning of being quiet and listening.
Mm-hmm.
And that took time. But the worship, the word, and study have been key.
May I ask you, with your study of the Word of God, is there times when you go through the scriptures, just read through the entire scriptures, or do you do topical studies, or are there different seasons in ways that you choose to ingest God's Word?
Wow, that's a great question. There definitely have been seasons. And there was a season where I was just voraciously hungry for the word. And I was in a Bible Institute program. It was a 2-year program. And oh my God, it was like the word that we were studying, even though it was systematic study, came to life. And there were times when the Spirit of the Lord would just come into our classes. It was just amazing. And when I finished that period of study, then as soon as I finished my last paper, someone called me to do ministry in Chicago. I mean, it was so unbelievably supernatural. And that was a season rich in the word. And then there was a season where I decided I was going to be a nominal Christian and just read whenever something came up. I can't believe I did that, but I did. And now I am rebuilding my relationship with the Lord, trying to find my new normal, trying to find how I study in this season and what to study. But since I'm in ministry training, that's helping to guide my study. But then there's my own personal time with the Lord. And right now, I'm being led as I pray.
Mm-hmm.
What to read, when to read it,
Mm-hmm.
because that's really critical as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's the Spirit of the Lord that gives you understanding of the word, because the word is spirit and it's life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's legal if it doesn't have the Spirit of the Lord guiding you.
Yeah.
So it's much more productive.
Yeah, that's good. And to have that perspective on what you said a moment ago about how like living the word is, and the word is so clearly articulated that way, that it is living and that it's sharper than a two-edged sword and it pierces. And those are very active words, and they're life words, or they're getting your attention kind of words. And I don't believe that God has ever done anything passively. It's always done with so much intention. And if we can honor God's word in that way, to be as intentional to listen and to open ourselves. I know for me, there's times when I definitely have it on as background, and it's not because I am passively not wanting it to just be a filler. It's just that whatever I'm doing, I have it, it's on my phone. I just have the recording word, and it's just going through, and there'll be parts of it that will stand out and just cause my, spirit just to be enlivened. And then whatever I do, I stop and I go back over and I stop it and I just start reading and reading. So I believe there's so many ways that the word can come alive in our life, and it's seasonally. But I appreciate that there is this intentionality and pursuit of how you have encountered the word. And as we were discussing before this started, just he keeps pursuing us, and we're in different seasons all of the time. And that's the beauty of God's word too, that it just meets us fresh and new all of the time. So with this life that you've lived, I know that you've had a very disciplined life. And part of that's just been because of the calling that you've had as a dancer and as an artist, the calling that you have on your life as a worshiper. And that stuff just doesn't happen. You work and you dig and you dedicate. And And so I know that there's some disciplines that you've cultivated and as a leader. And sometimes I know you've not even asked for the leadership roles, and God has just bestowed them on you. But as you look back at your own life and areas that you really feel is important for you as a leader to cultivate leadership skills, I'd love to hear about what some of those are for your own self, and then what ones would you encourage for others that maybe you're still striving for, but not striving in a negative way, just obtaining, desiring to achieve. But just this whole conversation about, skills and discipline and cultivating leadership qualities. I'd love to hear from you.
Cynthia, that's a very loaded question.
I know it is.
Let's go back to discipline. Studying ballet and the pursuit of ballet and performing ballet is an extreme discipline. You have to discipline your brain to learn choreography. You have to discipline your brain to take authority over your body. You are exercising small muscle groups, tendons and ligaments and nerves to do things that are not normal. Dancing on point isn't normal. I love it, but dancing on point isn't normal. It requires your life. You cannot be effective in ballet just showing up. You have to show up with your muscles ready. You have to show up with your brain in gear. You have to show up with imagination. You have to show up with faith. Ballet in particular is faith. It is refined faith.
Uh-huh.
You have to go and see things. You have to be a keen observer of people and life. The best and most brilliant artists whose work you remember for time after they've died are those that bring all of these things together in a performance. Their life experience, their technique, their discipline, their integration with music and or rhythm and time. And when you do that over a period of time, so that it's like speaking, that's what touches people's hearts. Steps are great, but it's the integration of those things. Like I said in a conversation we just had about how sacred the space of theater and performance is. There's a very fine line between performance and worship. And the difference, I believe, is faith. So, discipline, I think this is important. I didn't realize how important discipline was until I decided to leave ballet, because it was just taking over everything and I didn't have a life. So I wanted to be Wild Girl. So I went and did Wild Girl for a season. And then Wild Girl didn't last too long because I ended up back, in a more disciplined environment, because that's something that my spirit could relate to. Now, what's interesting is I'm really glad that when God started wooing me closer to him in regard to worship, I was at Perfecting Faith Church in Long Island. And the pastor is Pastor Donald McClurkin, who was a composer and singer, musician. So there's a certain level of discipline that comes with being that was necessary for me to connect so that my faith could infuse the dance in a different way. What was interesting was that I said, okay, God, you're calling me away from this career as I've known it. Because I also did musical theater. And so I had to sing and act and all that, and study voice, and study different types of dance outside of ballet, jazz, tap, and get, some level of proficiency at it. But I had to work really, really hard. You don't get, like you said, you just don't get it overnight. That is going to drama classes between matinee and evening shows while you're on Broadway. That's paying $75, $80 a week for voice lessons and singing whenever you could. That's going to the theater all the time to understand how people do this. It's going to Pilates class to make sure your body has multi-level training so that you can prevent injury and last longer. So anyway, it was good for me to be, when God said come away, to be in a ministry that was with a leader who was also an artist, because there was a level of expectancy and discipline that I connected to. What's interesting about that is in church culture, that level of focus and discipline isn't the norm. So my task in the last 18, 19 years has been to find balance. And only God can do that, with a willing heart that says, I need it.
Yeah.
So in cultivating leadership skills, how does that relate to cultivating leadership skills? Is to hopefully let my life be an example, and also lead people to a place where they can discover their gifting and their calling and their ability, and give and plant an environment where they can cultivate their gifts and discover their gifts and walk in a level of faith to get it all stirred up and moving, and not to rely on someone to give them something, but to discover. And when people discover for themselves, they retain it longer. So that's how I would relate discipline to developing, leadership skills.
Okay.
I think it's important as an effective leader to be a perceptive person and to look at people not just what they want you to see, but utilize gifts of discernment to understand who they are. And then when you understand how people are, then you interact with them differently. If you're in a room full of people that you have to supervise or manage, you can't treat everybody the same way. So it's good for a leader to understand how to look at people for who they are and then find their language that they connect to. And I have found that is effective. You might get resistance at first, but it's effective, because then people will pour their hearts into what they're doing, because they see that someone understands who they are and what they bring to the process.
Wow, that's gorgeous. So I'm hearing you say that there's this part of being inquisitive that is so important. And so it's asking questions as a leader and not proposing that we already know the answers to the questions. And we all know there's times in conversations when we're just waiting to interject something because we've got something to say, as opposed to just putting a hold on that and just taking the time really to cultivate listening. And that's obviously listening to God, listening to people. And that shows a reverence and respect in a conversation. But as you're saying too, just that importance of valuing other people and really understanding that they contribute, that people have something to offer. And it's not a dictatorship. You're not going at it alone, and allowing those voices to be a part of what and how the Spirit moves. That's so rich and so kingdom-like to have those values. So you've seen a lot, because I know you've been all over the planet, and you've done that as a working artist, educator, teacher, performer. And I know you've also are continuing to cultivate this minister's heart that's been a part of you, but also being activated now more in this season of life, and how incredible that is. So I'd love for you to share about that, just how you believe God is continuing to be real and present in your life, and continuing to nudge and encourage and position you and give you platforms for other areas in dance. And then I'd also love to hear from you about what do you feel like is going on in the world of dance today, and how is the Kingdom Artist able to have a voice to encourage, inspire, influence in some way in what we know of as the world of the arts today?
So the first part is the new season of leadership.
New season of leadership, just where you are currently as an artist and a believer artist, and then how do you believe God's going to use you in that realm of what you see, or what do you feel like needs to be called out of other believer artists to meet what is going on in the world today?
It's a loaded question. It's so loaded. First of all, I didn't like really ask for this. Like, I would say about 15 years ago, I was feeling like God had called me. So my leadership at the time said, we're watching, we'll see. I said, okay, fine. And then I ruptured my Achilles, which changed my whole life. And I could no longer go to that church. So I was like, I don't have to worry about that part of my life. I'm going to just discard it. And I'm going to live my life and have fun. Now, whether I may retain Christianity, I don't know at this point, but I'm just going to have fun. No, that was really what happened.
Oh, yeah.
And then I found a church and I sat in the back for years. And I got discovered on the back pews, which is hilarious. So after I got discovered by the pastor and the congregation from the back pew, I kid you not, from the back pew to Bible study in a stage reading, how does that happen? But that was the path God had for me.
Yeah.
And the bishop of that ministry said, you need to come and talk to me because there's too much insight. I'm like, and I'm laughing to myself because I loved being in the back. Because you get to see things. You get to observe things. People don't know you're watching. They just assume that you've checked out in the back. It was one priceless time in my life. And then my bishop said, it's time. You've danced the word, and now it's time to understand leadership and to speak the word. And when he eventually said that, I said, I didn't come here for that. I came in the office for something else. He said, no, it's time. It's time. And so that's where I am now, in the leadership mentoring phase, learning leadership, having no choice but to dig into the word, because when they give us assignments, it's so hard that you have to pray. You have to pray. They seem like simple questions they ask. But so deceiving.
Yes, they are.
And so I really appreciate it, though, because it's really making me personally dig past the scars, dig past the just stuff that never got dealt with, dig in to figure out who God created me to be and the purpose that God created me to be. That's what being a leader is, understanding who you are and doing the scaffolding and the digging so that you get the stuff that doesn't need to be in there out. And God can flow through you so that people can see God through you and they can see him. So it's created me a clean heart, of God. Renew a right spirit in me so that eventually transgressors can see your ways and follow you. And that's what I see God is doing in this season. I am being mentored in a very untraditional way. But it's what God needs from me to go forth in my purpose. It doesn't make sense at all, but it makes perfect sense to me. And I'm seeing God like press me into a place where I can't go to the left or to the right anymore. It's like I have to look up and I have to move forward. There's none of this anymore. It's like, you know. And so it's really forcing me in tight situations to really dig into that word, and like things that I read before that didn't make sense. Now that I'm in this place, it's like, oh, that's what you're saying. You know, like one passage was, feed my sheep and endure the suffering. And I'm like, and I didn't understand that until now. In order to feed the sheep, you have to endure the suffering so that you understand what they're going through. If you've never gone through anything and you've never had to submit to God as your only help, you can't help anybody else. But then there's the accountability part of being mentored and being held, you know, responsible for what you're learning and how to fit it in the context of your life. And that's important. And it flows through in the arts, because one of the things about being an artist and being a creative is that you think and move in color. But what's important when it comes to the things of God is understanding structure and administration. And that's where artists sometimes miss it. They don't understand the administrative part of leadership and being an artist. And it just goes like this. It's like, no, you have to be like this. And not just see the trees, but what's inside the forest. And that's what I'm learning in this season. How to be an effective creative leader. It's hard.
Yeah, sure.
It's hard. But I feel like I'm finally in my purpose. How does this relate to the arts? Working in the archive at Dance Theatre of Harlem has had a profound impact on my life, because I didn't realize that I was part of a phenomenon. So looking at different seasons of the archive and realized that I was too a part of making history, and that the stories from my life are the stepping stones for the next generation. And I really wasn't expecting that. And it's really important to understand the significance of legacy and passing it on. And when you pass something on, you just don't pass it on in information. You have to also pass it on with the spirit and how it accomplished what it did at that time. For example, Creole Giselle, just an example. Arthur Mitchell decided that in order for Dance Theatre of Harlem to move to the next level and the ballerinas to really become world class, they had to do a full-length ballet. And Giselle was the full-length ballet of choice. But he knew that we couldn't do Giselle in a context in Austria because most of us were from other countries, from the diaspora. So he chose Louisiana. My God, the brilliance in choosing Louisiana, because there was a free people of color culture in Louisiana at the same time Giselle was created in France. It worked. There was even folklore that backed up why they were Willies. Just brilliant. He knew that we needed to tap into something to bring the story to life. And so that had a profound impact on me. And we were just enjoying having pretty costumes. And I loved Giselle's story. I loved the music, loved the choreography. So I'm like, yeah, this is fun. 30 years later, it's history. With important messages about the whole process. And it's like, oh, now I get it. And so I think it's important for leaders to understand legacy and understand how to share legacy. And as a Christian in the arts and entertainment industry, my life and career went in seasons. I grew up in church, then I went to Dance Theatre of Harlem, and I knew there were certain things I didn't feel comfortable doing, but I pushed all boundaries. I pushed a lot of boundaries. But then I ended up going back to what I was taught and found out how valuable it is. And then that was going to be the stepping stone to the season, is understanding myself as a worshiper. Where God has me now is understanding myself as a worshiper who takes that wherever I go, in any arena. And it took time. And I'm glad that I've lived long enough to witness it. And so I would encourage Christians who are in the marketplace, stay focused. Stay in the heart of God. Stay in God's face. Understand, allow God to work on your discernment so you know that what you can do and what you can't do. Mm-hmm. Because in that knowing what you can't do is where people will come to you and ask you questions. Mm-hmm. And that's when you can share about Jesus. Mm-hmm. But you have to really understand who you are, what God has called you to, understand God's heart, mm-hmm. and be faithful to that. Be faithful to that. Because there are a lot of things that can deter you. But I'm finding that it's much more effective to stay focused. Mm-hmm. And even if it's not popular, stay focused. Mm-hmm. Because when somebody's in a dry and parched place, they're going to look to you to bring water. Mm-hmm. The water of the living word, the water of the living God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. How true. Just this legacy understanding, and when we put it in the biblical context, this year, 2019, I've listened through the scriptures, and I'm actually on the second loop around to just listen to the Bible in its entirety. And I've really learned again how consistent, intentional God is, but just through our forefathers and foremothers that have gone before us in the stories in their lives, and that they've cleared a path for us. And we have strong women in the scriptures that are gorgeous models of what it is to pursue God and to be utilized as a strong and effective voice for his will to be accomplished, in men, obviously, as well. But when we look at in our realm of the arts and those foremothers and forefathers in our dance realm that have gone before us, and being able to understand that legacy, and then, as you shared so beautifully, that you have been a part of this history, and what do we do with that? Well, we can either just kind of bask in the glory of, oh, wasn't that amazing that I did that? Or we can really choose to know that now I'm responsible. I've had this life, and now I'm responsible for what I'm going to do with this. And how then am I going to continue to move forward with that heritage and want to perpetuate more artists, and to help, it's like parenting, to help kind of spare them, your children, from things that they don't really need to go through, that you learned those lessons. And so I just hear that in your heart, that you really want to treasure where you've come from, and yet understand the depth of that, and to pass that on with fervor. And as we know, the days are getting short. Just who knows, the Lord, if he chooses to tarry, but it's just, there's a lot of work to do. And how do you see that changing in this season in particular, as you feel like, or not necessarily just feel, believe that God has passed a new baton to you, or a new mantle that you're carrying as a worship leader, artist, minister, dancer, speaker, orator. I mean, there's a lot in you in these days ahead. Where do you feel like he's going to be leading you? Is it going to continue to be in the marketplace that you'll have a voice? Do you believe that it's in the church predominantly, or continues to be a fusion of all of that? Where do you sense he's leading you in this next season of your life?
I believe it's going to continue to be a fusion. I tend to be in the gap. I constantly see a pattern of God using me in the gap between. It's not just church. It's not just marketplace. There's this odd in between. It's a place where people are seeking, but they're afraid. It's like people in the marketplace are seeking God, but they're afraid to say anything or have anybody see them. And they find me. You would be surprised. Then there's the church, and it's like, well, how do I navigate the marketplace? They tell us not to do that. And it's like, you have to seek the Lord and get his instructions for your life so that you can be effective and point people back to him. So I'm in the gap. Another example. I was asked to fill in for my boss at the Actors Fund annual benefit. That's a big deal in the entertainment industry. And I was nervous to the 1000th degree because it showed me that God had taken me on a full circle journey. Because it wasn't just my ballet colleagues. It was my theater colleagues. I disappeared from the theater industry, I think it was 18 years ago. It was like I was like this, budding ingenue and was working, and then all of a sudden I disappeared and people were curious. So I'm like, Lord, oh my God, how do I navigate this? And BB Newworth told me, because I'm freaking out because I'm in the room with BB Newworth and Bjork Lee and Camille Brown, and I'm like, Lord, there's all this history in the room. And BB says, and you're part of it. And it was like, oh yeah. And it was right after Arthur Mitchell died. And I was going to introduce Dance Theatre of Harlem. And as I prepared to speak, I realized that Mr. Mitchell and Dance Theatre of Harlem had impacted such a large group of people that were also in musical theater. And I remember taking note about 20 years ago. If you looked in the bios of dancers of color, many of them passed through Dance Theatre of Harlem. And so I said that, I shared that, and you could have heard a pin drop in the room. Oh my God, was I petrified. But when I went to the side, when I finished speaking, I felt the presence of the Lord. I was like, Lord, this is what I'm called to do, huh? And so it just was so beautiful when I ran into a friend that I had done, a colleague that I had done a Broadway show with. And we were goofy, 20-year-olds, this goofy. And when we saw each other, we went back to being goofballs. But after he heard me speak, he says, I see the artist and the educator and the amazing speaker. That touched my heart. And so, yeah, I'm one of those in the gap. I really, lately, I've been toying with this idea to have some sort of talk show so that I can help people see what happens in this place where I live. And I want to do my spoken word. I want to perform again. I want to do a movie with a role that's written just for me, so that once again I could do what I do. And I want to write. I've got these books that I'm working on, and actually when I started this process of coming back to worship from the back pew, a friend said, you need to write a timeline of what God's doing. And I looked at it for the first time in about a year. I was intrigued. It was interesting. So that's a book. And then there's another book about my career as an artist. And then there's a book about my journey in ministry. That they're all being simultaneously developed. When they will be launched, I don't know. I just feel like I was thinking at 55 that I'd be done and I could just kick it and retire. And it seems like a new section of my life is being launched.
Well, we are glad that the launching is continuing. And being 56 myself, I know that, a few years ago, it just felt like it was time that I was really being pulled and nudged to step away from something that had been a part of my life for so long. And it's God's faithfulness that he leads us. He leads us beside quiet waters, and he restores our soul. And there's no time confined to that. And he regenerates us. His mercies are new every morning, and great is his faithfulness. And so if we wake up in our 50s, or we wake up in our 60s, or we wake up in our 70s, or our 80s, or our 90s, if there's life and breath in us, and it's us that are able to say it's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives within, then if we fully relinquish to him and say, have your way, not my will, but your will be done, and we mean that seriously, then we don't know exactly what's going to come. And that's where that, how we started with this whole piece of faith comes into play, that it's a life of faith. And we can try to navigate it and orchestrate it, and we'll get just that out of it. But if we really depend on God to number our days and write our story and write our life, then how amazing it is.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, in closing, is there anything that you would like to share in particular that you'd like to encourage leaders or others, or any nuggets that we haven't been able to touch in on as we're bringing to a close?
One of the things that I was told by one of the mentors in my life, Charlene Hunter Called, who was the first African-American to graduate from the University of Georgia. When I met her when I was 15, she said, keep a journal. Your journey as a 15-year-old is very unusual. Keep a journal and become a student of life. And that's what I've endeavored to do. And it has proven to be valuable. And as you started out with listening to learn and learn to listen is also a very powerful lesson, not only with being a leader, but in relationships in general. And it's important for people that are older to be open to learning from the young people. Oh, they can teach you a lot. And the minute that you close off, you're dead because you're no longer effective.
Yes.
So just be open to learning and have courage to love. Love is powerful, and that's what distinguishes Jesus Christ from any other person, ideology. It's the love, the courage to love. That's the difference. And spread love, the love of Christ, the radical love of Christ that changed the world.
Ooh, that's the way. Love. And it conquers it all. Love conquers it all. Wow, wonderful. Well, I'd love for people to be able to find you, so I can put that in the link at the end, just to either find you on Facebook or in some form, whatever you feel would be the best.
They can find me on Facebook
Okay, great.
at Theara Ward, and I have a WordPress. I think it's Theara Ward at WordPress.com.
Excellent.
And that's my website.
Brilliant.
Basically for my writing at the moment.
Okay.
But yeah, they can, and on Instagram at Theara.j.
Brilliant. All right, I'll make sure I put all those links in. Well, my sister, I love you, and I'm so thankful for you and your life and your faithfulness to the Lord and the Lord's faithfulness in and through you. And girl, there's so much yet to come.
I love you too, and thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for this amazing opportunity.
You're welcome, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you.